Good evening. The hour of 6 p.m. having arrived, I call to order this regular meeting of the Municipal Services, Facilities, and Infrastructure Committee. Meeting is being broadcast live on the City of Keene YouTube channel and channel 1302. Video is also being streamed on the city's website and is posted on the website by the end of the next business day, barring any technical difficulties. Copies of the agenda are available in the wall pockets as you enter the room. The public will be recognized to ask questions and make comments on the agenda item under discussion. After being recognized, all remarks are to be made through the chair. I won't recognize an individual a second time until everyone else has had a chance to speak. Anyone who wishes to address the committee is asked to go to one of the microphones in the room. Identify yourself by name and address prior to speaking. Our minute taker is participating remotely this evening. Committee members, remember to turn your microphone on. If the minute taker is unable to hear, they'll ask that you speak louder or remind you to turn the microphone on. So as I said, I do call this meeting to order. I note that we have our full committee, therefore our quorum is present. First item on our agenda, we have a communication from Charles Smith. Is he present? Yes. City manager?
So he was in communication with the city clerk's office and has asked to withdraw his letter, so there's no need for a motion.
Do we need a motion? Or
No.
Nothing?
No.
Okay, moving on. Next item, oh, I see it says that there. This is an oral update. East Side residents traffic calming on east side of Keene. Our city engineer, Don Lucier. Good evening.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Don Lucier, city engineer. Caught me off guard a little bit there. I had to straighten my tie real quick. Happy to be here tonight to report out on the petition from residents in the East Keene neighborhood for traffic calming and a speed study to look at their neighborhood and speed issues within it. At your tables, you should have a copy of a handout that's being spread out in the audience right now. Kind of a summary of the data that we're going to go through, but we'll get into it in a little bit of detail here. So I'm actually, with your indulgence, going to try to address three separate issues with its study tonight. The first, of course, is the petition that we received from the East Keene neighborhood a couple months ago. We'll talk quite a bit about that. But I'm also going to kind of turn the Wayback Machine on and talk about a tasking from the City Council to Public Works from 2019 that was sort of, quite honestly, left hanging after the pandemic started. But we do want to kind of bring that back to your attention and try to wrap that up. And then finally, we have had several requests for four-way stop signs, different locations. A couple of them are in East Keene, so I thought that would be fair to shoehorn them into this presentation, and we'll talk about those. Full disclosure, I recently discovered that AI can generate images. So you're going to see some oddball images tonight, and this is the first one of them. I'm not sure exactly how this is supposed to make me feel calm when the cars are about to have a head-on collision, but that was what AI generated for traffic calming. So first we'll talk about the East Keene traffic study. So over the last few months, we've collected data from a total of 11 different locations throughout the East Keene neighborhood, and those are shown in the pairs of dots there. So each location includes 2 data collection points, one in each direction on the roadway, so that the machine can only record data in one direction. So to collect, for example, at site 1, turn on the little pointer here. So to collect data at site 1 on Roxbury Street, we have to actually put out 2 monitors and collect data in both directions. At each of those sites, data was collected for 2 separate weeks. We collected it for 4 or 5 days. with the display turned off. And then we turned the display on and collected for another 4 or 5 days. And those collections were set up so we straddled the weekend. The batteries on the machines don't quite last 7 days, so they can be between 4 and 6 days of data collection at each one of those things, each one of those locations. So all told, we have 44 different data sets that we're going to be looking at. I will say that the locations were selected to try to find like where we thought we would find the fastest speeds. So for example, on these side streets, we put them towards the center of the road, not near the intersections. On Roxbury and on Water Street, we moved them away from the bottom of the hill where there's curves and hills that would kind of cause people to drive differently. And the other thing I will say, in sort of preparation, I'm going to be talking a lot tonight about the 85th percentile speed. And some of you have heard me talk about this before. The 85th percentile speed is the speed at which 85% of the drivers are traveling at or below. By definition, it means that there's 15% of the drivers that are going faster than the 85th percentile speed. But 85th percentile is what engineers kind of consider to be an indication of what a reasonable and prudent driver is going to be expected to do, right? What we find is that 85th percentile speed is sort of like a natural speed limit. Without any signs or speed limits at all, that's what most people feel comfortable driving a given roadway segment at. So that's the explanation of what that all means. Okay, so here's the first data set. So you'll see there's 11 locations spread across the bottom here. At each location, I'm giving you 2 columns. The left column is going to be, depending on the roadway and the orientation of that road, it's either the westbound traffic direction or the northbound traffic direction. And the right column in each pair is the opposite, eastbound or southbound. So for example, if we look at Eastern Ave, Eastern Ave obviously goes north-south. So this column in blue is going to be your northbound speed measurement, 85th percentile speed with the display turned off. And the orange column here is going to be the 85th percentile speed in the southbound direction with the display turned off. I've also included the line here. I think it got moved a little bit, but that's supposed to be at 30 miles an hour. For Eastern Ave, you'll see there's also a line at 25 miles an hour. Eastern Ave is posted currently at 25 miles per hour, and we'll talk about that in a little bit more detail in a minute. But generally speaking, what we see is at all of the data collection locations, that 85th percentile speed was basically at or only slightly above the posted speed limit. If we look at Eastern Ave was the highest recorded for the 85th percentile. That was, with my notes, 34.25 miles per hour was the 85th percentile speed. In the northbound direction, in the southbound direction, it was 31.5. I will point out on your handouts that I've given you today, I'm using the average of both the northbound and southbound or east-west pairs. So on the table on there, it's the average of 34.25 and 31.5 gives you 32.9 miles per hour as the average 85th percentile speed for Eastern Ave. So again, it's a little bit above the posted speed limit, but I will tell you, from an engineering perspective, we would not look at this set of data and say that there's a holistic system-wide speed problem in this neighborhood. So comparing this to the data with the display turned on, really we see very little change. I think intuitively that makes a lot of sense, right? If I'm already driving at or below the posted speed limit, I'm not going to drive any slower because you remind me the speed I'm driving. I think the next slide actually is a better way to look at it. I've basically just smushed those 2 slides together. So for each location, you'll see 2 pairs. The first pair on the left is the pair with the display first off and then on in the westbound or northbound direction, as the case may be. And then the right two columns in each of those locations is the display turned off and on in the other direction. So again, we'll pick on Eastern Ave again. This first column here in Eastern Ave is the display turned off in the northbound direction. When we turn the display on, we see that the 85th percentile speed drops a few tenths of a mile per hour. In the southbound direction, the speeds were recorded a little bit lower, and again, they dropped ever so slightly when we turned the display on. Okay. I will say there is kind of one quirky outlier, and that is Valley Street. When we turned the display on, the 85th percentile speed actually jumped up 4.6 miles an hour. I guess we reminded people that they were going slower than the speed limit, so they sped up. But that it's a low volume road. They're already going well below the posted speed limit, so I wouldn't put a lot of stock into that. I mentioned Eastern Ave as being kind of an interesting case. We've actually done a number of different data collections on Eastern Ave over the years, typically in response to complaints or requests from residents. So the first two columns on the left here were taken before the speed limit was changed in the fall of 2020. So July 2016 and September 2020. That September 2020 was immediately before and as a result of the request to lower the speed limit. And what you see is the data following the reduction in the speed limit really doesn't show any change in driver behavior. The speeds basically didn't change once we lowered the speed limit. And that, again, kind of reflects what I was saying earlier about the 85th percentile speed being sort of a natural speed limit. If the reasonable and prudent driver feels comfortable on a given roadway going 32 miles an hour, just putting up a sign that says 25 isn't going to change that. If we really are intentional on dropping the speed from 32 to 25, we're really going to have to look at additional control measures. Things like lane width reduction, curbing, and tree canopy to make that roadway feel more constrained. We could think about things like speed tables. I know that's not that can be controversial in and of itself, or just a whole heck of a lot of enforcement effort and start ticketing people when they do 26 miles an hour. But barring that, people's natural behavior isn't going to change just because we put up a sign. Okay. So that's kind of the end of the speed study. I will summarize and say the data doesn't suggest that there's a widespread speed concern in this neighborhood. But that said, we know that there's a small number of vehicles that are going much faster than the speed limit. And that, I'm fond of saying that there's no engineering solution to human behavior. That last 2 or 3% of outliers, the people that are intent on driving like jerks, are very hard to control. Reminding drivers of their actual speeds didn't really change the behavior. And like I said, I think that's mostly because majority of them were already driving the speed limit. And then lastly, reducing the posted speed limit on Eastern Ave didn't actually change driver behavior either. Okay.
What did you see in the 15%, the speeders?
So,
Do you have any numbers on?
So the different data that we're able to get out of the machines, we don't have like a measurement of each and every vehicle that goes through. We have by hour the maximum speed during that 1 hour block for each of the different data sets. What we saw when we looked at those is generally the max speeds, and I looked at Eastern Ave specifically for all 4 data sets. The maximum speeds that we were recording during those hours generally fluctuated between like 46 and 52 miles an hour. There was some outliers, I think maybe up into like the 60s.
60?
Yeah. And again, there's going to be a percentage of vehicles that are going to drive like jerks, unfortunately. But those are outliers for sure.
That sounds like an enforcement issue.
Yeah.
So, yes, please continue.
Okay.
Sorry.
So now I'm going to kind of pivot a little bit and talk about the council's request from 2019. Like I said, in 2019, the city council kind of directed the Public Works to develop a scope of work for a comprehensive neighborhood speed study to look at what neighborhoods and what streets and neighborhoods it would make sense to lower the speed limits on. And like I said, and I apologize for this, but January 2020, the world kind of went upside down, and it basically fell off of our radar until the East Keene neighborhood petition came in, and it sort of tickled the city clerk's memory. So the good news is, well, I will start by saying, based on the data we've collected in the East Keene neighborhood, and frankly, a lot of other one-off speed studies we've done over the last 6-8 years, the results from the last few months are very typical of what we find when we get speed complaints. The majority of people drive reasonably, and a small number of people drive much faster than the speed limit. So it's hard for me to look at those trends and say, there's it'd be worthwhile for the city to spend a lot of time and money researching and doing these speed studies to look at this problem. But that said, we do have new tools that are available that weren't available, or at least I didn't know about in 2019. And that's in the form of so-called big data. I put the logos for a couple of companies that do this. They're streetlightdata.com, or whatever they call themselves, is one firm. I know the city of Manchester is using them. TomTom, you may have heard that from GPS devices. They're another company that's doing this sort of data aggregation. Basically, what these companies are doing is taking data from GPS units that are in commercial vehicles, connected vehicles. So if you drive a Tesla and it's connected to the cloud when you park at night, they're collecting data about your driving and where you were during the day, and they're selling that data. And then the other thing is if you have location-based services turned on your phone, or you're using Waze to navigate to your friend's house, they're collecting data about your driving habits and selling that to these third-party aggregators. So we can get access to that data. The nice thing with that would be it gives us access to every street in the city for any period of time. We can look at it, what's the trends in the winter months, what's the trends in the summer months, what's the trends during different times of day, and parse it all kinds of different ways. They're able to collect through these third-party sources a lot more data than we could ever do with city staff and our 5 sign panels. I don't have a quote, but just exchanging emails with the regional sales rep for Streetlight, he suggested a budgetary number for that for a city our size, depending on what data sets we would want access to, would be $5,000 to $20,000 a year. So that's something to consider. The one thing I would say that does recommend it, and I would love to have, they don't just have access to data for vehicles, they have access to all modes, everything except anything that's land-based. So they don't have data on air travel or sea travel, but they have data on train travel, bike, ped, transit. They aggregate all of it. Their algorithms supposedly can figure out if you were riding a bike or walking or riding, in a vehicle. So that would give us, a solution to something Andy and I have talked about a lot, about having good sidewalk count data and trail counters, that sort of thing, which would be really nice to have. So that's what I would say about that. Exchanging emails with the sales rep, of course, they're trying to sell us the sizzle. And I kind of told them what our use case was, that we just wrapped up this 2.5, 3 month data collection effort in Pitt's neighborhood, and we're presenting it. And he shot me back a couple of graphics in less than a few minutes. It was like 20 minutes later, he sent me back this analysis that he had done showing average speeds for some of the roads in our study area graphically and on a map. It's pretty impressive. Of course, he's trying to make a sale, so. Okay. And the last thing is four-way stops. So, like I said, we've received over the last few months requests for four-way stop signs at a few locations. So this is going to include Roxbury Street at North and South Lincoln, Water Street at Community Way and Grove Street, as well as the Ralston Street, Emerald Street, Plaza four-way. It's kind of a four-way intersection, even though there's only 3 roads there. So that we've gone through the analysis on those 3 locations. So I think everybody here knows this, but the city has adopted the NHDOT standards as our standard for traffic control devices. What the DOT standard has adopted the federal manual on uniform traffic control devices, MUTCD, as their standard for traffic controls. So looking at that MUTCD, it provides what it calls warrants, basically criteria for evaluating all-way stop conditions. And they're listed here. So they look at crash experience. Specifically, they want to see more than 5 crashes in a 12-month period or more than 6 in a 36-month period. They're looking at sight distance, and they don't give a number. They say not adequate. For defining adequate, you'd have to look at the highway design manual and what it says for safe stopping sight distance. City code actually is based on a 200-foot safe stopping sight distance, and that is basically essentially works out to what the highway design manual safe stopping distance is for a 30-mile-an-hour speed zone. It looks at interim controls. So if you have an intersection where you're planning to install a traffic control signal, traffic signal, then you could put in an all-way stop condition as a interim measure until that gets installed. Obviously, it's not applicable here. The big one is traffic volumes. More than 300 per hour for a major street and 200 for the minor street would be the thresholds. And that is an and condition. And then there's other factors. So things like, conflicts during left turn movements, or the engineering study suggests that the operation of an intersection would be improved if everybody had to stop. Situations where there's a real heavy bike ped condition, then that might be a reason to look at doing an all-way stop application. But I will say that the MUTCD also says explicitly the satisfaction of an all-way stop control warrant or warrants, plural, shall not itself require the installation of an all-way stop control at an unsignalized intersection. So these are criteria for evaluating. They're guidelines, but they don't mean you hit one and you absolutely have to do it. Conversely, it doesn't mean that we don't meet one of these, but we still want to do it. That's a sort of with the discretionary function of the city council, and you have that discretion. So, a question we get a lot, like, well, what's the harm in just putting up a stop sign? If the neighborhood wants a stop sign, just put up the stop sign. What's the harm? And it's a fair question. I'm going to give you the engineering explanation and reasoning. The disadvantage is, overuse of any traffic control system, sign, whatever it is. For example, installing stop signs for speed control, right? That's not an appropriate use of a stop sign. Overuse or misuse of any traffic control measure tends to diminish the effectiveness of that traffic control measure where you need it to work, right? So, we could put in a stop sign at every cross street on Roxbury Street, but I can guarantee you that people aren't going to obey those stop signs, and it's just going to encourage people to not obey stop signs where we really do need them to stop, right? So that's the reason why we don't want to just install them where they're not needed. Okay, so Roxbury at Lincoln Street, going through the criteria, we had 2 crashes. These are based on reports from the PD. We had 2 crashes at that intersection in a 42-month period ending in February. Sight distance greater than 200 feet, obviously the no interim control. We did meet the 8-hour volume for the major street, not for the minor street. So we almost met that criteria. I will say on the sight distance, I did look at this, went visit the site. The shrubbery here on the south side of Roxbury Street was getting a little woolly. It was starting to encroach on the sidewalk, and that did kind of cut down on the sight distance. For northbound folks looking back, towards downtown on Roxbury Street, it kind of crept into the sight distance a little bit. So I did put in a work order to have our highway guys trim that back. So I think that will improve somewhat. But generally, that still maintained a 200-foot sight distance, and we're not recommending an always stop for this location. Water at Grove is interesting, and interesting in a purely engineering sense, I guess. With the traffic, or with the crash history, we actually have recorded 7 crashes in the last 42 months at this location. One of them I know was a pretty serious motorcycle crash. We met the major street volume again for the major street, not for the minor street. But because of that crash history, clearly something is happening at this intersection that's just not working correctly. And we do recommend a 4-way stop control at this intersection. And then finally, Emerald at Ralston, which I understand isn't in East Keene, but I'm shoehorning it in. 1 crash in 42 months, greater than 200-foot sight distance. The 8-hour volume was met for the minor street, not the major street. This intersection is a little wonky, to be honest. The major street, the through street, I would almost consider to be Emerald on the east side and Ralston on the south side, because this is the through movement for the vast majority. And if you think of that as basically the through movement, I don't think it meets the criteria for either the major or the minor street. But regardless, there's no crash history, good sight distance, and we're not recommending a 4-way stop at this location. Okay. And with that, I am done, and I would love to take your questions.
Committee?
Yeah. A lot to take in.
Yep.
So I guess, one thing at a time. One area that's always been a concern, and you brought it up because we looked at Eastern Ave several years ago and reduced the speed limit. And as you're shown, they're still doing about 35 miles an hour, which is almost on the 85th percentile. They're still exceeding it by almost 10 miles an hour, which is excessive. And having relatives up in Eastern Ave, when I go to visit, every time I'm there, even if it's for 15 minutes, somebody goes by doing about 50. It's just, of course, Eastern Ave is pretty much seen as the east side bypass for a lot of people. They work in Optical Ave, where they're heading to Optical Ave. It's just where they avoid downtown and just use it. So out of all the intersections, the streets that we talked about, I still think Eastern Ave, for me anyhow, is a priority that something needs to be done just because of the speed. And when you add that extra 15% in, above the 85 percentile, I think we're going to see, a lot of excessive speed. Like I said, all you have to do is go sit there and watch it. And even if the average is 35 miles an hour. You know, every 10, 12, 15th car is, in my opinion, is doing 45, 50 because it is almost a bypass. My big concern of that, not only is how it is right now, that when we start this downtown project, the east side bypass is going to be the east side bypass. I mean, the traffic on that road is going to increase dramatically as people avoid the downtown project. So I guess in the short term, to the city manager, and as Councilor Greenwald mentioned, the short term is going to have to be enforcement. We need to slow the speed down on that street before we come back and say, you know, there was a fatal accident or a major accident there. You know, long term, I guess that's for all of us to decide and the full council decide, you know, with all of these streets in the city. But short term, going through all of this, with the exception, as you just mentioned, that Water Street intersection, which will have to be dealt with, we really need to, I think, to jump on Eastern Ave, and at least in the short term, and I know we've been short police officers for a while now, but I think, you know, maybe popping some radar up there for a couple of days and get people's attention is definitely overdue. So, like I said, a lot to take in. Going to have to go home and go over all this data again, and you know, all of us try to come up with something. But short term, I think we need to get some enforcement going. Thank you for the presentation.
Thank you.
Councilor, yeah, you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. You mentioned the big data companies and the cost difference ranging between 5K and 20K. You don't have to go into detail, but in your conversations with them, did they give you any indication of the different features between those costs? Like, that's a very big range. Would you have an indication of what package, so to speak, would, or price range would meet our needs as a city?
We haven't gotten into
That far.
anything like that level of detail. It was really literally just an exchange of emails. I reached out to them through their website and said, you know, I'd like to be able to give you a ballpark estimate of what that service might cost. If that's something that you're interested in and you'd like us to look into, I'd, you know, be happy to meet with that vendor's rep and talk through those details and report back.
Thank you.
Councilor Madison, anything? Yep, Laura.
Thank you. One question concerning the software as well, I guess. Does that have the potential, whether that or the, I'm going to get the initials, the MUTCD, right? Would that trigger a warning? So it sounds like at this point what's happened is you've kind of run certain intersections through this list of criteria, but is there the potential that, say, as data is being collected, that you'd get a red flag saying, hey, this is an intersection that you should look at?
I don't know the answer to your question, but I would assume that you could have it search, you know, and trigger based on the volume metrics. It's not going to be able to trigger based on the crash reports because it doesn't have that data set available. So it might help with analyzing, you know, some of the criteria, the volume specifically, but not all of them.
Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one more question. This is just concerning, you had mentioned the tree canopy being helpful in certain places and needing to cut the brush back in other places because that was impacting the sight line. Is that specifically because it's at an intersection, or is there?
Yeah, so generally having broader sight distance, longer sight distance tends to encourage drivers to drive faster. Conversely, you want to have clean sight lines at intersections where you've got conflict points. So yeah, when I mentioned the tree canopy, it wasn't so much to diminish sight distance as much as to just make the road feel more restricted and closed in. It's really it's you know, it's kind of a hybrid of engineering and psychology, to be honest.
Thank you. I just want to go back to Eastern Ave for a minute. And I appreciate the data that you had provided, especially that slide with the 4 different bar graphs. If I remember correctly, we also have an upcoming project at the rail trail and we were talking about a tabletop connection there possibly for that project.
So we're going to be in what was proposed and that's council approved, the plan, is going to be a rapidly flashing beacon, one of those, yellow beacons at that location, not a raised tabletop.
Okay. That was discussed, though, possibly, as one of the options, but we didn't.
I
go
think it
with
was
that.
discussed,
Yeah.
but that wasn't what the plan that we proposed and approved. So that's not currently in the plan.
I follow up with that. And I agree that once we start the construction, we'll probably see more traffic on Eastern Ave as a result of that, similar to what we see right now on Ralston and Emerald because of Island Street. But I just want to point out, if there's more cars using that, the likelihood is that the traffic will be slower, not faster, because there's more cars and whatnot. And then I would just recommend for Ralston, just maybe better lighting at that intersection. It's pretty dark there, which might help with some of the traffic issues and concerns. And that's all I have.
Thank you for all this analysis, and my quick observation. Most people are doing the right thing. There are a few that are exceeding, and that would be easily remedied by some directed enforcement to pay attention, to pick up those few that are really speeding. Before we move off this, I do want to ask Vicki Morton, who was one of the instigators of this request.
Instigator. Good word. Gee, thanks.
That's a good thing.
Vicki Morton, 275 Water Street. I have a question and a comment. In your data for the outliers, do you have days and times of when where there's the greatest violation of the speed limit?
So, Ms. Chair, I didn't mention it, I should have. I did try to pull out a pattern of when those outlier speeds were happening. Generally, they're evening hours, but we found them, those outlier speeds anywhere from 3 in the afternoon until 2 in the morning. There was no real clear
Okay.
pattern. I would love to be able to tell the PD, set a guy there at 10 o'clock because every night between 10 and 11, you're going to catch somebody, but we just didn't find that.
Because that would be the piece about enforcement.
Yeah.
We need to be here at this time. Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And the comment that I have is, I'm disappointed to hear about the recommendation for the 4 stop signs at Water, Grove, and Community Way. And I think initially, when that was constructed, when Community Way became a formal street, there were the 4-way stop signs, and it was very dangerous, and I think there was more accidents then than what we have now, currently. And my concern is that there are a lot of school children who use that intersection, and if we have people who are not paying attention to their turn in a four-way stop, that these kids will then be more endangered than they already are. And that some of these kids have difficulty in crossing that intersection to get to the school, Wheelock School. So that was my comment. I have a second question, and that is this the end of the update? Because I have some questions about other items that we've had ongoing through our conversations.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you. That was a good presentation. I don't think I was surprised that we don't have a lot of speeders, but when we have speeders, we really have speeders. One of the things we first talked about was the conditions of the sidewalks on Church and Roxbury Street. And I attempted to find what the schedule is for the replacement of those or upgrades on those sidewalks. And they don't seem to have come up higher on the calendar or sooner. Seems that they're still pretty far out. And I wondered if the one, particularly for Church Street, had to do with any renovations that are going for the whole street versus just improving the sidewalks. But the conditions of the sidewalks on Roxbury and Church are still an issue in the neighborhood. I see the gentlemen are here from Stanek, and I'm hoping that they'll have a piece of their presentation that talks about public toilets. But public toilets have been, in the past, a huge issue with our neighborhood, and I'm hoping that we'll find them in the final plans for the downtown redesign. When it comes to the Pat Russell Park, there are two things that we asked for. One was a bike rack. There's no bike rack at the park, so if you ride your bike to the park, you can lean it against the fence, you can lean it against, is it there? Okay, I'm sorry,
Yes.
out of order.
Yes, Mr. Bohannon.
But, yes, it will be installed after the holiday.
Okay.
They're just focusing on cemeteries, but it will be installed.
Thank you. And the second one is a much larger piece and more expensive, and it's the lighting that we requested on the canal side of the park, where it's very dark. There are lights in the Pat Russell Park, but they're on the street side. They're not on the back side where the canal is, and we had asked for lighting there. We also had asked for improved lighting at the intersection of the bike path and Water Street. There is a light there, but it's very dim, and if we could have an improved lighting there, it would make that crossway, that intersection much more safe than it is now. We're very interested in what happens with the neighborhood parking project, and how does that coincide with the renovations for downtown and Marlborough Street and the impact on the neighborhood of traffic around that, as well as the roadway safety plan and the impact on Eastside Keene. We've not heard of any resolution to the no parking in front of the South Lincoln School.
The city manager is writing down everything you're saying.
Oh, I can give my list. Only two more. Councilor Roberts in the fall made a comment, and he said, if they want to bring more people back to the East Side Keene, they need to upgrade the quality of the apartment buildings. He spoke about previous conversations at the council regarding a fund to help people buy and/or upgrade their properties. And I wondered where that was, and hand in hand with that is an update on code enforcement. Do they have more of a proactive approach in helping us clean up our neighborhood? Thank you.
Okay, yes.
Just quickly on the program to upgrade properties in the East Keene neighborhoods. There is a program, it's called 21 and 21. It's in partnership with SES. It was started a few years ago. We have done several projects in partnership with them, and so it's still ongoing. And then the second question, sorry, what was the last question, Jim?
Enforcement.
Oh, thank you, code enforcement. So we've made some significant changes in code enforcement, as you know. We've brought on Rick Wood as our fire marshal, and he now is overseeing the inspectors in both the community development department and the fire inspectors in the fire department. This was done in an effort to bring unity to the two departments and provide clear direction, and so he has been looking at creating a long-term program, because it will be a long-term program, to address blight issues. And so that is something that he's only been on board for a short period of time, and he will be making recommendations as he moves forward.
Thank you.
That one I could speak to, in terms of code enforcement and such. You need to make complaints. Code enforcement should be out with their eyes open, should be, but it takes a complaint to motivate them, and it takes a follow-up complaint. And after that, it takes a call to city councilors to keep pushing them along. I have several pending complaints that I'm hoping, I don't mean on me, I mean other properties, just to make clear with that. You know, the skate park, the former skate park, it's inexcusable There are several properties, I know there's one on Roxbury Street that I will be calling in. I think it's a legal 3-family, but it actually is a functional 7 unit. It's ridiculous. But without a call, they're not gonna move. So, and if you or some other resident is not comfortable, call me, and I'll make the call, and that keeps total anonymity. But that's the way it goes. And hopefully with these changes in code enforcement, it will improve, but it's very, very aggravating. So, yes, sir, back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Ms. Morton's comments reminded me of something that I neglected to mention. The intersection at Grove Community Way Water, that intersection right now has a flashing beacon at the crosswalk that we installed as part of the Water Street project. If the committee opts and the council adopts to change that to an always stop condition, we would recommend removing that flashing beacon. We've had the practice and the policy of using those at mid-block crossings where vehicles aren't expecting to find pedestrians, and we need to draw their attention to that situation. So we would recommend relocating that one. My recommendation would be to relocate it to the bike path. I know that's not the lighting that Ms. Morton was talking about at the crossing, but we would think that that'd be a good application at a mid-block crossing on a through lane to draw the vehicle's attention to the fact that there's a trail crossing there.
It would be staff's recommendation to make that a 4-way stop?
That's correct. And I should say, I was not aware that intersection was previously a 4-way stop, so I'm a little hesitant now. This is where, having that 30-year Public Works Director and that history really came in handy to sort of know that historical context. But I think before we move forward, I would like to look at that history and understand why that was done and why it was changed.
Okay, so if that could come back on our next agenda, that I think would be a good thing. So anything further? Other members of the public, if they want to join the conversation or committee? And it looks like a motion to accept as informational. Council Madison?
Move to accept this informational.
Second.
Motion's made and seconded. Council Filio. Anything further? Committee, counselor, not counselors, public? Seeing none, all in favor? Unanimous. Thank you. Okay, and now for the main event of the evening. We are in the final discussion for this committee, anyway, regarding the downtown infrastructure project. Focusing the discussion on Central Square, we had a presentation, we had a lot of public input, and now we're going to hear from Stantec, our consultant, and the committee has a list of topics that input is requested, and I would also point out, this is it. This is the time to say what's on your mind, because after this, the consultants will turn it into paper, and the next step is a council workshop. But if you have something, now's the time. So, yes, sir, Brett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brett Resnock, Public Works Department Project Manager. We have our consultant, Stantec, with us tonight. And the presentation that we have prepared is very similar to the one that was reviewed on May 8th, earlier this month. We did make 2 minor changes that we will review with you in a few minutes. And just a reminder, we did go through a very detailed presentation about how we approach the design of the Central Square area on May 8th. And so, since we didn't have time to get the council and committee's thoughts on some of the questions that we've asked, we hope that to be the focus of our discussion tonight. So, thank you.
Great, thank you, Brett. And thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of MSFI Committee. I'm Ed Roberge. I'm an engineer with Stantec. I'm here with Dave McNamara. I just want to make sure my thing was on. Also an engineer with Stantec, and Bob Corning is in the back. We did go through a pretty detailed presentation last time, and as Brett had indicated, it was just, I thought we would breeze through some of the slides, have the slides for reference, if we need to, but tie really into each section and the decision questions that we thought we would present tonight. This was a slide, just really, again, the conversation was all about Central Square. These were the same slides that came out of the public workshop. Signal phasing, the first section that we really focused on was traffic. So you could see this was the recommended alternative, really similar traffic patterns as that exists today with some of the new lane arrangements. We talked about U-turn alternatives, and this was one that really replicates essentially what is there. There's a little bit of geometry change that would be required, but the MSFI committee saw this last time. Also looked at an alternative that was also U-turn, but it was a permitted left turn for northbound Main Street to West Street. And we talked a little bit about the traffic and how the intersections levels of service change a little bit with this. One of the things that came out of the question, out of the last conversation, was essentially what was happening at the top of the square. And through conversation, and I'm gonna just, I'm gonna come off of this presentation mode and zoom in so you can see that a little bit. There was a lot of conversation with this committee as well as the public about the width of this, essentially the left turn loop back. We talked a lot about, the do not block the intersection to Winter Street, the do not block the intersection for somebody that's coming around the top of the square to go right on West. So we looked at the alternative here of widening this out for, a bypass capability. So I just wanted to note that the options that you see today, we've incorporated that, and that's a consideration point for the committee to talk about. But you can see we went from about 20.5 feet, that's in red, that was previous, to a 25-foot wide lane in this location right here. So I just wanted to make sure that I pointed that out. We did that for, as we talked before, about 2 lanes at the top of the square, as well as a single lane at the top of the square. So both option now has that widened section in there. And we can talk about that once we get into the decision points. Let me just go back to presentation mode. Basically, that conversation that came about the top of the square was how is that traffic managed along the top? And you can see here that, we looked at, in this single lane approach, it's really kind of a single file arrangement of traffic coming from Washington and coming from Main Street or Roxbury that combine. There's a lot of things going on. So we wanted to show and present this opportunity or this option and understand the safety ramifications and just the management of traffic and a traffic calming component. We also did show the 2 lanes and how that weave really works today. And that weave is nearly as long as the leg of that corridor itself. And you can see a lot of stress, a lot of conflict that happens there. So part of that decision points that we get to will be to talk about a 2-lane approach versus a single-lane approach there. We talked about the pedestrian and bike crossings. In the next section, you'll see that we did talk about raising table intersections at the crosswalk approach from Washington as well as Court, and the intersection at the top of the square, and you'll see that rendered shortly. But these were just some examples of raised crosswalks that you're familiar with in the community already. The rapid flashing beacons, the yellow signs, the yellow crosswalk sign with flashing beacons. And then again, just some of the interaction between bikes, peds at some of these crosswalks. We did talk about the public workshop summary last time, so we don't really need to talk about that. So this is where we got to the point of some of the discussions. And if the committee would like me to continue or pause here so that you can think and talk about some of these decision points that are really related to traffic.
Well, do you want to start picking them off, or do you want to hear it all,
I guess keep rolling.
hear it all, yeah.
Okay, let's keep going.
Then we drop back as we do it.
Yeah, we can always refer back to any of these slides that are in here. So this was a separate table. As you recall, we had 3 tables. This was really talking about the sidewalk streetscape at the north section, of the north of the square. And again, we're showing that 2-lane arrangement, and we're also showing that single-lane arrangement at the top. But you can see that the perimeter of the circle is flanked by the bike lanes, the furniture areas, the sidewalks. I'll come off of presentation mode just to zoom in a little bit here. The existing commerce areas that are already licensed, anything that you see along the edge here that's in that pinkish cyanish color, is existing licensed outdoor facilities that are there today. I mentioned the raised crosswalk. This is the raised crosswalk at the Washington Street approach, and how the bike lanes from Washington Street tie in. We talked a little bit about the raised crosswalk to the top of the common area, and that's shown here. Again, this is in the single lane operation. We reduced the single lane to 20 feet. Which allowed us to gain a bit of space along the quarter here at the sidewalk. And we're showing bike lane, we're showing buffer zones, we're showing a 9-foot sidewalk, and then we're showing a 10-foot commerce area. Very similar, as I mentioned before, raised crosswalk at the Court Street approach. Do not block the intersection boxes here that we think it would help. And again, the widened loop right here that would seem to work as this committee, as well as the public mentioned before, maintaining the on-street or the on-sidewalk commerce zones as we had here. Let me go back. Oop, bear with me one second. I got the wrong clicker. We did go through these sections just showing the differences between what was existing and proposed. We had 3 sections that we cut. The public comment was really positive about this graphic, just to show the differences. So we can go over this in detail if the committee wanted to do so, but I'll just go quickly through. It was a section on each at the top of the square. These were just general comments that we summarized, and again, looking to get MSFI feedback for the approach here. So we'll come back to this when you're ready to go. I'm going to ask Bob to come up, and I think he's close by. He can really detail quickly the actual common space. Thank you.
Good evening, Bob Corning, landscape architect, Stantec. Really, nothing has changed in the presentation from what we reviewed last time. We had some historic photos for reference, some of the existing features that are at the existing green, inventory of the trees around the perimeter as well as the green, and the only tree that's currently proposed to be removed is a diseased sugar maple in the green itself. The existing conditions, and then we had 3 options. The first option, which we called minimal, which was basically keeping most of the pedestrian circulation that's there now, modifying it at the south end to respond to relocated crosswalks, mostly the one at Court Street, modifications to the gazebo bandstand, and then some additional planting. The second option, which we called enhanced, was an extension of the first option, but introducing some spoked walkways that's reminiscent of some of the history of the square, the layout, as well as a perimeter walk. And then the third option was simplifying the pedestrian circulation, really connecting the strong desire lines from crosswalk to crosswalk, and then from the Washington Street crosswalk to the bandstand, which would require the removal of an additional honey locust on the south side. And again, the comments that we reviewed last time, one of the things to highlight is there was quite a bit of discussion about, we didn't propose any modifications to the existing fountain. There was a lot of discussion in the public meeting about modifying, enhancing, or replacing the existing fountain. So that'd be an important thing to get some input on. And then the list of questions that we talked about last time. I think that's it.
So you ready to start, first to go through the checklist? Okay, good. Okay, committee, here we go. Topic number 1 regarding the south side of the square. Which alternative do you prefer for northbound traffic? No U-turns permitted. A dedicated U-turn lane, 1 lane for Court Street and West Street traffic, and 1 lane for Roxbury, Washington Street. Do you have a graphic on this? Yes.
Yep, I'm sorry, let me move that up.
And I think that choice 3 was pretty well eliminated last time. That was creating a left turn from Main Street straight over to West Street. And I think that even if it's a great idea, it's going to be so confusing that we're terrorizing the public enough. We don't have to do that. So, personally, I like this option with the U-turn at the flagpole. I think it's very much necessary, takes a lot of the pressure off the square, and that would be my thought. Committee? They're taking notes, so this is it. Yeah, yeah.
You know, I'm very against the U-turn at the flagpole. I think we should push traffic around the square.
Okay. Councilor Madison?
I'm in agreement with Council Workman. I do think we need to push traffic around the square. That U-turn by the flagpole tends to be pretty problematic from my standpoint.
I disagree. I think from so many of my constituents, that the U-turn at that flagpole is needed, especially now that we're going to be reducing lanes around the common. The last thing we want to do is push extra traffic into the common that doesn't have to be there. As I mentioned in the past, I know one of the complaints has been on that U-turn is that it had a tendency to back up a little bit. I think with the new lights being put in, that could be easily rectified, is when the northbound light turns green, the southbound lane could be delayed 6-7 seconds to allow those several cars to just get out of the way. I don't think that's rocket science at all. That's one of the reasons we're getting new programmable lights. So, like I said, by eliminating that U-turn, that's going to force every car that was, say, downtown for an event or out to dinner or at a concert, that's going to force every car that their full intent was to go back south, it's going to put additional traffic into the common that's just not needed to be there. So I think that, and from hearing my constituents, that U-turn is definitely needed.
Councilor Tobin?
I have mixed feelings, honestly. On one hand, I am not very opposed to the U-turn, but one concern I had was that if that was not best practices in terms of balance, as the DOT was saying, is that kind of best practices? You shouldn't have a crosswalk at a U-turn. Is that, if I'm remembering correctly?
I think the crosswalk is a little north of it, but
I thought that, yeah, if I'm remembering correctly, I thought that was the problem, and that would be the reason that I would be less inclined to go with that option, but.
I think from the perspective of the pedestrian crossing right there, the way that the signal is operated now, it's an exclusive pedestrian phase, as we call it. Somebody pushes the button, it goes all red, it's all stop. You do have that movement, but that movement, that the U-turn would be, folks could still make that movement. It's behind the crosswalk, so there's enough of a separation. I don't think there's a vehicle conflict, and then anything moving through the intersection would be at an all-stop condition at that point. So the pedestrian phasing shouldn't be too affected by
Okay.
that.
I guess I would keep the U-turn then.
okay. And just stirring into it, the other reason why I think it's very important people searching for parking spaces are different from people that are just traveling through or around. So to make it a little more convenient, where there is no real loss of any traffic flow or any problem. Yeah. okay.
I just want to highlight, I don't think any amount of traffic lights will fix the problem of that left inner lane. Many times, when the cars are trying to use that U-turn, I mean, I guess with that, it's a separate lane, but then, again, we're taking more space for a third lane. I don't see the need for it. And then you still have traffic coming in from West Street that delays people from taking that U-turn too. So, I am a strong, staunch opponent of that U-turn.
Sounds like the council workshop will be resolving this one, because we do have a split committee on it. Right, yes, good. Okay, moving along.
No commitment from
What, you?
your decision?
My decision?
Yeah,
I want the U-turn.
okay.
There's no question in my mind. You know, as adamant as Council Workman is, I am more adamant. But anyway, that's fine. There's 15 councilors that will decide this. Okay, traffic circulation around the square. Do you prefer 2 circulating lanes on the north side or a single? Yep, somebody? What, oh, okay. Laura?
Thank you. So, one thing that was actually really helpful was the visualization of traffic patterns, and what I was realizing is that I was thinking of it in terms of 1 lane or 2 lane, but looking at the traffic patterns, it actually looks like it's a decision about where to merge, like whether to merge before the crosswalk or after the crosswalk, and that made a lot of sense to me that it would be 1 lane to merge before the crosswalk.
Okay, Councilor Madison? You guys also can just say pass if you don't, really.
Personally, I'm a little inclined to keep it 2 lanes, to go with the 2-lane option. Yeah, it's just my thoughts right now, but I reserve the right to change that.
Of course. Yes.
I'd lean towards the 1 lane to ease the flow of traffic and avoid any merging conflicts.
Okay, I've had some long discussions about this one. I definitely prefer the 2-lane. Once again, and I pointed out before, especially the top of the square on the west side, where the newer plan showed basically 1 lane going and waiting to go, if you're going to go south on Main Street or go out to West Street, the plan that was being shown right there was only going to be 1 lane. And I've said in the past, my problem with that is during heavy traffic periods when traffic's coming down Court Street, if you have 1 car sitting at that intersection trying to come over to West Street and that area is jammed, any car trying to go south of Main Street is now going to stack behind that car around the common and not be able to access the southern lane going down Main Street. They're going to wait for that car to clear to go over to West Street. I think it's extremely important. And for me, this is a go or no-go vote on the whole project. If we do not have 2 lanes coming around there and just widening that just a little bit, and even if we have to, as we rebuild the common, shift it a couple of feet to the east, just so we can allow a little bit more space to come around the common, I think absolutely you have to have 2 lanes going through there and clearly marked with yellow lines. I mean, it's going to be a lot narrower than what it is now, a lot narrower. But I think one of the problems is right now it's not marked. And I think even if it's narrower and you have 2, and if you have to repaint them a few times a year, so be it. Just let the traffic know where they're going to be going. I think one of the problems we hear now is people don't know where to go around the common. Well, it's hard to because it's not clearly marked. So once again, I think that absolutely has to be 2 lanes coming around there. And like I said, for me, Yeah, right there, the 2 lanes where you're merging, coming up in front of the square, coming up in front of the church. The right lane's gonna definitely have to go up Court Street anyhow. Then the lane coming around the common, going south, that needs to be widened a little bit. So like I said, if a car wants to go out West Street and they have to wait, they can. If a car wants to go south down Main Street, they can. I see this whole project actually coming to a grinding halt if we don't do this right on that particular area. And I want to point out to the council that a few weeks ago, a majority of the council voted to have money to look at a 400-car parking garage. If that's built, that's going to be 400 extra cars downtown, and the last thing I want to see is reduced lanes going around the common for that added traffic that we said is going to come downtown. So I think it's either going to be one way or it's going to be the other way. So, like I said, at this point, for me, this whole project is a go or no-go based on those lanes coming around the common. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, what I see when I look outside at the church is not 2 lanes, it's more like 3, maybe 3.5. So I think that there's really more than enough room to accomplish everything there. Get the 2 lanes of traffic, more sidewalk vending space, and if you have to, shave a couple of feet off the top of the common. The common is actually getting larger, if you look at that diagram, both where the little hand is as you're moving it, and also on the east side, it's also getting larger. I don't think it would really make an awful lot of difference, and I really think that the engineers can make that work, keeping 2 lanes. If you go to 1 lane, the other real disaster are the cars trying to back out. And that, I just can't imagine how that would happen if it's all squeezed down to 1 lane. So I guess you have the general sense of the committee on this one, and as with everything, the council committee, when we all meet as a whole, we'll see what happens then. This should be a little easier. Raised crosswalks across Washington Street, Court Street, and Central Square in front of the church.
I'll go first.
Do it short.
Sure. You want me to?
Just say yes.
I'll say yes. Yeah, I think this might be an easier one for the committee, but then again, you never know. I think the raised crosswalks increase the safety downtown. I think, and these are going to be, if I remember right, they're planning on being the flashing lights. So,
No, that's the next question.
yeah, no, we did that separately? Okay, well, fine. Yes, I agree with the raised crosswalks downtown for traffic, cut or safety.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, definitely.
No.
I'm concerned about accessibility with the raised crosswalks. Anytime you continuously change the surface for people with mobility issues, it can create problems. I'd like to see more of the flashing lights for crossing at those intersections, which is number 4.
One of you speak to the issue of mobility and raised crosswalks? Because we seem to be drifting towards that.
The actual, the tabled crosswalk is actually better for accessibility because it's at the sidewalk grade. So you're not going down through a curb cut across the street and then back up onto the sidewalk, so it's all at the same level as the sidewalk.
Does that make you feel better?
It does.
And just to
Not
follow.
you.
Oh, sorry.
Yes.
Good.
Okay.
Okay. I like it.
Yep, good.
We're done? All right. Flashing beacons installed at the 3 crossings.
Yes.
Chair says yes.
Yep. Yep.
Yep.
If I may, Mr. Counselor,
Oh, no.
I just want to point out, as a designer and a landscape architect in the sensitivity of the green, one option would be to do the RFBs at Court and Washington, but then not at the Central Square crossing, potentially, just because of visual impact it might have on the green. That's just a personal opinion. So I don't know if there's an opportunity to look at each one individually, or whether we have to look at them all together.
I would be open to listening to you, because I didn't really see it as any kind of an issue. But if you do, I do, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, thinking about the number of people who take pictures of the church, I think those beacons, because they are pretty large structures, could be problematic at that location. But the other 2 locations make perfect sense.
There's also embedded in the ground flashing lights. they tried that on Winchester Street, and I don't know if that is something worth considering. Stantec people? Oh, or Don?
If I may, Mr. Chair, we did try those on Winchester Street, and I'm not going to say they were an abject failure, but
It did
they were
work.
definitely problematic. They work great where you don't have to plow, but they've been a sort of a maintenance issue, I think, from the beginning. So I can't really recommend the in-ground
Okay.
lighting systems.
Yep.
I just want to highlight that if we went with the one-lane option right there, it would make that crosswalk a lot safer.
Or not. Maybe. Hey, it's going to take 8 votes to decide. Okay, moving on. Oh, you? Oh, I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
I actually don't feel great about the lit crosswalks in that area, just because there are a lot of lights at different levels. Restaurants have lights outside, stores have lights in windows, street lights, and when it rains, I've been in the reflection can be very problematic and it just bounces off of everything. So I don't feel great about it having those in a place with a lot of lights.
Okay. All right. Okay. Regarding southbound traffic, we have 2 possibilities. A left with U-turn lane and a single through lane, or a left with U-turn lane and 2 through lanes. Can you clarify that?
I'm gonna go back to the plan here.
Question 5.
So I think the question here was, if I'm just looking at let me go back to the original here. What we're showing in what was called the recommended alternative that came out of this design study was this configuration. And I think the question here was, do you prefer southbound traffic to be provided with a left U-turn lane and a single through lane, which is what is recommended here, or a further expansion to include 2 southbound lanes? And that's what the configuration question is here on this, at this point.
Okay, and it seems to be a given that the slip lane is gone, and as was explained very adequately this morning to me, that really increases the pedestrian safety at the crosswalk, and there really is not any great loss to the drivers, because you could still go from Court Street around to Washington Street. You just don't have that slip lane, and, I'll give it up for pedestrian safety. But the question before us is regarding how many lanes heading south. And if you could put the little hand in the area, yeah. Committee, what are your thoughts?
This is an issue that we've discussed recently also. I am concerned, I guess not so much for the slip lane, but I am concerned that we only have 1 lane going southbound now. And the lane where there used to be a slip lane or a reverse lane coming around the common, when the lights change green, that light stays red. So there is only going to be 1 light going green sending people down Main Street. Anybody that's going to be taking a left to go down Roxbury Street or now reversing direction around the common is now going to have to wait in that 1 lane till that lane turns green. I think, once again, as we've narrowed the traffic lanes around the common, it's going to back things up a little bit. I would like to see 2 lanes going south along with that 1 lane that's taking a left onto Roxbury or reversing direction up to Washington Street. With that said, and we've had some discussion on this, what it might require a little bit, because let's face it, the common's going to be all dug up. And when we put it back together again, And you can see down to the east side of the common, we kind of had what you described as kind of a drop-off area or a parking area, whatever. We could actually add that third lane simply by shifting the rebuilt common a few feet to the south. It wouldn't, I don't think it'd create any hardship at all, and it would allow the extra southbound lane going down Main Street. Right now, we have 2 designated lanes going down Main Street and then 1 to loop around the common. Once again, we're reducing lanes and we're reducing traffic flow, and I don't see that working adequately. So I would like to see 2 designated southbound lanes, and that other lane that's going down Roxbury and around Washington can remain there, but once again, it's lighted. The light turns green, only 1 light turns green for southbound traffic, so I'd like to see that modified.
And as a follow-up to and I don't mean to interrupt.
No,
but,
please, go.
we put together, what potentially could be that solution that we talked about last time, so we were aware of it. There's a couple things that drive the geometry that you're looking at right now, and this would be what we're just talking about, 2 southbound lanes and this left turn lane that would operate. When we do that, we left the common as is. If there's a decision to encroach in the common, because we are gaining, as the chair mentioned before, we are gaining space elsewhere. The concern here is that when we add the lanes, so if we're pushing from this configuration to this configuration, we are pushing everything back a little bit. So the area along the sidewalk frontage gets pushed back a little bit. You can see where the bike lane is essentially near or maybe halfway into where the existing curb line is. So there is still space to be had here. It's just less than what was there before with obviously 2 lanes. It works, geometrically it works. If we were able to pull it a little bit further east, that would be an advantage to maximizing the sidewalk space that you would like along this block. The U-turn is unique, and we talked about this before. With this U-turn, we did have to pull back. That's why you see this jog right here in the bike lane. In order to keep vehicles from, encroaching into parked cars on this movement, we did shift that over a little bit. So there's still sidewalk gain, less than there was before, but there's still sidewalk gain from how it exists today. And that helps this movement out a little bit, because it positions this bump out a little further back to make it work. Makes this crosswalk a little bit longer, but as you can imagine, and obviously this crosswalk is a little bit longer, but it's all the balance of trade-off and how it operates. We saw when we did the traffic modeling, we were able to clear this queue quite effectively. It's still a long queue, and it's behaving the same way that it does today. There's delay. There's a level of service D to E at times when we look at the peak hour traffic out here. But this certainly would empty the queue much easier. And this also could lead into other parts of your discussion. Because if you're looking at trying to maximize sidewalk space here, or encroaching into the top of the common a little bit, that's where your sidewalk width can maximize, or even reconsider dropping down to a single lane along the top. Because now you know that your queuing will pretty much clear out fairly well with the 2 southbound lanes. So we did look at it, we heard you, and we think we have a solution that geometrically would work and perform is at least as well as it performs today.
Whatever you're calling this, put me down.
Yeah, just follow up.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Name it something.
What you put, and I appreciate this, I know you heard my comments over the last week. For me, this works. The design, yes, you're showing it here, and it's not, there's some things that I don't like, but I guess that's, politics is the art of compromise. But as far as, getting the extra traffic down Main Street, getting the 2 lanes around the common, and if you have to shift a few feet to the south or to the east, fine. We just eliminate what you call the drop-off area a little bit, just for picking up a few feet. This particular plan, like I said, even though not perfect to me, works. So, I mean, I'm 1 out of 15, I get that. The other 14 might disagree with me. If this is the proposal that comes before the council, I'm in. Thank you.
It's not a question on the sheet, but the turn onto West Street, is that just a yield, going to become a yield instead of a traffic signal?
I think this movement will be signalized.
Does it have to be?
That's a good question. I mean, it's a yield-controlled movement today.
No, it's
No,
a,
no, it's not, actually, it is signal optioned.
It's a no
I think
right turn
that's
on
a
red.
good question for our our signal designer. Yeah.
Same question for Roxbury Street. So,
Yeah.
just write it down, please.
Can I follow up?
Yeah.
To follow up on what he's saying, obviously, we're putting in modern signalized traffic lights, because he's out here like 50 years old. You can program the traffic lights to do anything. It could be, right turn on blinking red, or right turn on yellow, or, I think those are simple solutions, just a matter of programming the lights in, depending on the majority of the council asks for. And I'm sure the engineer is going to agree with me. I can see it in his eyes.
I was actually going to Mr. Chair, if I may, respond to something Councilor Filio said a few moments ago about the loading zone, so-called, on the east side of the common. Just to refresh your memory, that was specifically put in there not as a parking or loading area, but it was actually a specific request of the emergency services, because of the preference that we maintain the counter flow of traffic for emergency response. They're concerned with, people who stop sort of dead in their tracks when they see the lights, and wanting to be able to maneuver around vehicles that may be stopped in the traffic lanes. So I don't want to, lose sight of that, the purpose of that.
Just one follow-up.
And the other issue, so many large trucks are knocking over those granite blocks, that I think that's a great solution as they're making the turn.
Just to follow up, yeah, I have no problem with that. Like I said, if this is the plan that's brought before the full council, I'm fine. And it prevents, like you said, of using that particular few feet of common. So I'm good with this proposal.
Okay, all right, so around the horn, Andrew.
Yeah, I'm fine with this proposal as well. I think it makes sense.
Kat?
I like the third lane, but again, I still think the single lane around near the church and no flagpole. I'll give you your third lane for the deletion of those two.
Laura?
I prefer the single lane.
Well, not really talking single lane, this is about the third lane.
Okay. Okay.
You could say pass at this time, too. They're just taking notes on everything, and
Yeah, I guess I'll pass. I thought, okay.
yes, ma'am.
I think what's confusing is the question is actually written as 2 lanes or 1, and it's because we're talking about the lane that's going on to Main Street.
Yeah,
So I think that's where the confusion is. Yeah.
that's why
Okay,
I asked
sorry.
for
Yeah,
pictures.
thank you. I'm not
I didn't
crazy.
understand what they wrote down either. Okay, so moving along on this sheet, and I think we're doing really, really well, actually. There's so many decisions that are going on, and I'm just visualizing, what is this going to look like when it's done, and the public is judging us? Or, oh, man, I'm leaving town. Landscaping treatments for the common. What is your preference for walkways on the common? Choices: minimal changes only as needed to meet proposed crosswalks, add an exterior circulating loop and spokes, reconfigure walkways to create direct paths along desired lines. I don't think this is an ultra-critical decision at this time, but
I have a thought.
your thoughts, anybody?
I have a
Yep.
thought. So I actually really like the path that goes around, and here's why. When I look at the square right now, a lot of it is underutilized, and I see this being used a lot. I know that from an overhead view, it may not seem as appealing, but we're making the square bigger, which kind of creates it as a space to go. And right now, it wouldn't make sense to me creating a path through it as opposed to creating a path around it where people could actually walk and enjoy it.
Yeah, Andrew?
Initially, I was gonna say minimal changes, but after hearing Councilor Tobin's thoughts, I actually agree. I think the path around looks really nice. I think that would be really enjoyable.
Yep.
I also like the enhanced option. I think with more concrete pathways, when we do have events, it'll move people better. And then it also creates small little pockets of green area. So I can envision different activities, different people using and enjoying the common in different ways, having it broken up that way.
Yeah,
Yeah, it looks like we might have a bingo on this one, I agree.
and I don't care.
There you go. That's close enough to a bingo.
Yeah. All right, moving along. And I pick my fights somewhat. All right, do you prefer that all walkways remain concrete, or should we selectively use pavers or other treatments to highlight areas of the common?
I'll comment on
Yeah.
that. Those of us who lived in Keene for a while remember the disaster when we did pavers on the sidewalks, because especially people with mobility issues in wheelchairs, and it's bumpity bump, and then shoveling them, ice pockets created between. So I think it should be as smooth as possible with a hard surface as possible for people, especially those in wheelchairs and like devices.
You didn't like the crosswalks pavers either.
Nope.
That was a fight years ago.
Yep.
Yeah,
Lost that
Andrew?
one.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Pavers are a pain. I'd say keep it as flat and smooth as possible.
Yeah.
In agreement.
Or?
Sounds good.
Good, done, unanimous. Do you want to reconfigure the bandstand to allow improved visibility of performers? I will throw one thought out. I do not want to rebuild the bandstand or move the bandstand as part of this project. Improving it, reconfiguring is fine by me, but at some point, we do have to consider, we have to pay for all of this stuff. So just to eliminate some of the less essential. So the question is to reconfigure the bandstand, and what it's looking for looks like wider stairs for performers or something.
If I may, yeah, the thought is to wrap the stair around two other sides of the octagon shape and remove the railings to just open it up, make it more visible and accessible.
Good. Good, good.
Yep, good.
I can't see through you.
Yep.
Yes? No?
Good.
Pass, I don't have a preference.
Okay.
Okay, good. Sounds like a good thing there. Bandstand. Oh, I jumped to question number 9, which asked, do you want to relocate the bandstand to increase seating on the lawn? And my thought is not. It's a great idea, but it just seems like, I'd take a wild guess it will be a $100,000 project. So I would say not. But yeah. Oh, no.
I agree with you.
Nope. It's a no.
I
Oh,
agree.
yeah, no?
No, I
You
said
good?
I agree.
Okay. See, when he leans forward, I can't see you.
know.
Okay, regarding the fountain, questions. We can keep the existing fountain. We can replace the existing fountain with a more historical fountain. We can eliminate it totally. Do you have an illustration of the original one? I should have brought mine.
I don't think we do.
No, not in that one. But it doesn't really matter specifically. This will turn into a likely community project, because now we're talking about art, and that's kind of hard to. So the question would be, Do you favor eliminating it totally or keeping the granite blocks that are there now, or something new?
Something new, I think, remember when that was put in the 70s, it was definitely a low budget, and it shows, it's probably one of the uglier fountains anywhere. And I do agree that this, get the community involved in this, put a few designs out there and let the community make some decisions on this. Mitch is right, this is art, and everybody's, one person's art is definitely not another person's, but I think that'd be one of those simple things to let the community decide on.
We'll send it to Mr. Bohannon.
There you go.
Yep.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but wasn't portion of the fountain donated by the city of Einbeck?
By who?
The city of Einbeck, our sister city?
No.
I don't believe it was donated by them. I think there is some plaque or recognition of our, arrangement with Einbeck, but I don't
But
think it was
no.
actually
The fountain
donated by
goes
them.
back
Yeah.
way before anyone knew where Einbeck was.
Okay, in that case, yeah, I'd be fine with replacing
You
it.
know, we could memorialize Einbeck, but, yeah.
Mhm.
I like it, but I don't have a preference either way. No.
Well, at the rec
Strong
center, there
feelings.
was a fountain, and the choice was to turn it into a garden. That was a good choice.
I'm not attached to this particular fountain, but I do like the seating that it creates
Yeah.
on the outside, so it would be nice to see something similar if we decided not to keep the fountain.
Okay. Then the next question is, do you prefer to keep the statue, that would be the soldier, in its current location or relocate it closer to the southern tip of the common?
No preference.
No preference.
I say leave it alone.
Yeah, I'd honestly like to be able to walk and see the front of it.
Oh, well, you're going to be able to see more of the front of it in this, and this enhanced common also. It's going to have room for a bigger Christmas tree. Okay, question 12. How do you feel about the cannons and cannonballs?
Keep them, and I think we've heard at a particular meeting we had, there's a lot of history behind those as far as the dedication to them, and I think they're historic. I think we keep them along near the statue.
Yeah.
Agree.
Laura?
Yep, agree.
Good, done, you got it. Do you have concerns about adding trees to the common or removing shrubs around the fountain area? Hadn't really thought of it.
The removal of the shrubs around the fountain was in response to trying to create some additional space for spectators when they're reviewing any performances or anything at the gazebo. It would open that space up a little bit more. The additional trees is in response to the fact that we are expanding the green in a couple of areas, so we're increasing the green space, but then also thinking about succession of trees. So you always want to be replacing trees as they get mature and have to be removed. You want new trees to replace those. So always trying to replicate and have a succession of planting.
Okay, yep.
I agree with moving the shrubs and adding trees. It gives more shade, and as we know in the city, you can never have enough trees. So no, I think removing the shrubs and adding trees and gives more shade. I think that works for me.
Yeah, I appreciate the comments about tree succession, because my concern is that a lot of the trees at the common now are of a similar age, which means they're probably going to die around the same time. So having trees ready planted and ready to mature on the common is going to be important. But I'm fine with removing the shrubs around the fountain.
Yep. Laura?
Yep, that sounds good.
Yep. Same, good. Okay, question 14 on the back for those that are following along. Would you like to see any changes to the proposed sidewalk commerce zones? What changes are you asking?
Let me get to that graphic. So within the common itself, there's a variety of types where there's, and I'll pick the Washington Street side first. You know, there's a wide section, and then there's an additional section that meanders out, and even some tables that are out in here, that's all part of your licensing. What we tried to do was just apply kind of a consistent approach where we would have our sidewalk curb, the bike lane, the buffer, the bike lane, and then whatever the landscape buffer is, the sidewalk section, so you can see that contiguous walking path without interruption. And then any commerce would be placed against the building. So if there was a need to be more creative, I don't think it needs to be, maybe it's not even a design decision, because what we're trying to do is offer as much flexible space as possible, and then the manager, the council can decide on how those licensings are issued. So if there was anything that needed to be changed, same thing here with the top. We're showing, right now, it's licensed along the curb edge between the trees, as you can see now. Again, being consistent with the assumption that most of the commerce would be against the buildings. The other leg as well, they're up outside along the curb line out in the front, and we reapplied it. So again, I don't think it's a critical decision component, other than just trying to create enough flexible space to offer the same, kind of similar use through licensing.
Are you suggesting that the concrete have different finish, or?
We didn't drill into the material types along the sidewalk as of yet, other than coloring it to kind of show, just to display where the centralized walking path would be, and then any other space, either on the landscaping side or on the building side. I think is that fair? I'm narrating as an engineer what our streetscape design is looking at, but I think that's what we were trying to get at.
Yeah, I'll chime in on this one, Mr. Chair. My recommendation, my hope is that we do use the same material, and it's probably going to be concrete, for these street side commerce zones. The coloring on the graphics is there to kind of, just basically explain what the different areas and the zones are that we're trying to create. But that's not a different paving treatment or anything like that. It's really just showing that that space is available for that use.
Okay. I was reflecting back on, I guess, the downtown of the 1970s project, and that had stamped green concrete, which looked great. However, it got slippery, and then anytime there was a repair or a patch, it was a disaster. So, kind of going along with what the city engineer is saying, be consistent, be simple, good. Anything, committee?
Good.
Liking it.
Okay, and the final question, if additional sidewalk space is available, referring to question 2, I don't know what that's about, should it be used to increase available pedestrian zone, commerce zone, or furnishing zone, such as more landscaping?
This question, Mr. Chair, was really aimed at if the committee decided that they wanted to do the one-lane option. And we haven't heard that as a consensus yet tonight, so it may be a moot point. So, I don't know if that helps or distracts from your deliberation, but
No, at
that's
least I understand
what this question
I
is
understand
getting
your
at. Is
question now.
if we shrink the roadway width, what do we want to prioritize for the use of that additional space?
Commerce zone, as far as I'm concerned. Laura?
I mean, benches would be nice, but that would be my preference.
Benches are going wherever they're going. We haven't really gotten into the furniture and the benches.
That was the other option on the, do I want it? It was
yeah.
pedestrian zone, commerce, or furnishing, or more landscaping. And I would lean towards furnishing or landscaping.
So the question is basically, if this is just one lane, then do we want to make the changes? Is that particularly where this question is
If it's
for?
one lane, we get an extra 5 or so feet of real estate, and how do we want to allocate that extra 5 feet?
Like I mentioned, for my 115th, we go to one lane, I'm voting no anyhow, so it won't matter.
Well, and one point just to make, and I think we tried to stress this before, when we're talking about one single lane, this is a 20-foot lane. And it's 20 feet really purposefully, because when we again, the police fire safety group, when we coordinated with them, that was an important thing. They would acquiesce to a one lane if there was bypass capability. In this case, this has the ability for moving traffic that's coming in and out of parking spaces, as well as the bypass capability, or the occasional FedEx truck. So it's not a 12-foot lane. It's essentially really pretty substantial for a single lane. But it just, from a utility purpose, you just needed to have it a little bit wider than like a standard 12-foot lane. So, okay.
Okay, well, I guess we'll continue to discuss this.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like, if we do the one lane, I'd like to see the extra space used for pedestrian and commerce, like split equally, expand the sidewalk a little bit and the commerce section a little bit.
I don't particularly have an opinion.
Absolutely, it's going to be commerce zone, but I'm also going to work hard to get the 2 lanes. So we'll talk more. So we've been through the checklist, and just to throw a comment from a previous, the heading south, the left turn onto Railroad Street to continue. Voicing a comment from the mayor. I know it's not a Central Square question, but that was like an open, undecided.
So I'm not sure this was undecided. I think it might have been controversial, but I think that the conversation landed on pedestrian safety, because turning there, because we have so many things going on in that location, is a pedestrian safety concern.
Okay, well, council workshop will end that one.
And impedes traffic.
Yep, good. So anything, other questions, committee? Done.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. This has really been extraordinarily helpful, and I commend the committee for getting through this list and being able to give us some really clear guidance on most of the items. So I'll just wrap up with kind of a summary of the next steps. So where there isn't clear consensus and guidance from the committee, we'll be able to talk about the alternatives and the pros and the cons at the council workshop that's coming up on June 11th. Plugging that. So that'll be the next step in this process. We'll basically be going through the 3 presentations in a boiled down version and showing them the preferences that you've expressed to us. And again, where there isn't a clear consensus on a preference, we'll be able to talk about both alternatives or multiple alternatives and the pros and cons of that. We're expecting at that council workshop, again, we're not going to be looking for a formal vote or an action by the committee. I think that's, in keeping with your policy of not taking or not doing votes at a workshop, but more of like a discussion and an open debate about these different topics and different issues, and basically tuning up what's been discussed and reviewed and preferences expressed so far. So that the next step after that, it'll get referred back to MSFI. So we'll be back on the 26th of June. And at that point, we're going to show you basically the project from soup to nuts, based on what we've heard at all of these meetings and what we think that the council is ready to vote on. And hopefully at that point, there's a pretty clear direction on which way to go. And that meeting will be looking for this committee to make a formal recommendation back to the council on the preliminary design. And that'll be, all of these questions that we've discussed and how we're going to move forward with them. Okay.
Okay,
Thank you.
I really want to thank city staff, Stantec staff, city manager, and this committee. I think we have maintained the integrity of downtown in this discussion. We've gotten along well, and a lot of compromise has gone on, and there will be more compromises, but I think ultimately the integrity of what we have that makes this downtown terrific is being maintained. Very, very important. So, motion or just say goodnight? What do you think? Oh, yeah, okay. Yeah, I suppose informational, so move to consider this process and meeting as informational.
Second.
And the city clerk will tell me otherwise. So, anything further? All in favor? Boom. Thank you. Thank you all for coming.
All right, so you're right, you guys got to.